I want to tell you about the Victure AC940 action camera. This is a nice little 4K camera that'll do 60 frames per second. And I've had several of these that I've used on my bicycle and in other situations too. They're nice cameras for the price. I paid 50 or 60 bucks for mine on eBay. I think this camera is also sold as the Wolfgang camera in Europe. And so let's see, let's start with this. I've modified this by putting a little rubber bumper on this little bumper here. That makes it easier to press the button and start recording, especially when you have gloves on in the winter. I find the button was hard to press, so I put that on there. Before you do that, you need to turn the camera on. And this camera actually is not going to turn on, I don't think. But this is the button that you use to turn the camera on normally. Oh, look, maybe it's going to turn on. No, I think it's dead. I have another one that works, and we'll be talking about both of them here. I also should mention that I'm using a GoPro Hero 11 to record this little video. It's a much nicer camera, the GoPro, and definitely recommend it. We're not going to be reviewing the GoPro, but we will be mentioning it now and again, perhaps here. Okay, so I've labeled this camera A because I found that one of my batteries somehow became distorted. This is the battery compartment. And I found that one of the batteries became distorted probably due to heat. Anyway, it was slightly different in size from other batteries that I had for this camera, and it would only fit in this camera, even though I had several identical cameras. Anyway, so here's the battery. And the batteries will give you pretty good life. I haven't actually tested it to make sure exactly what the time is, but I would say it's over an hour. It depends on what your video settings are, and there's quite a few different settings that you can choose from. One of the nice things about this camera is it's supposedly waterproof. I took mine in a swimming pool after I had been using it for a few months, and it actually died on me. So that wasn't a very encouraging sign. But I know people have used these successfully in water. But if I was going to do that again, I would use the plastic case, the clear plastic case that comes with it, to give myself more protection. All right, so there's actually two doors. We open one, that's the battery compartment, and it is a lot easier to open if you put some rubber gloves on. It's kind of hard to do with just your bare hands, I find. So this is a little tripod mount, and the thing is, you can't change the battery if it's on a tripod, right? Unless you take it off the tripod and then you open the latch. So that's kind of inconvenient, but that's how it is. And there's actually another door over here, so there's two doors. And this one is where you charge. You put the charging cable in there to charge the camera battery. So I think the reason that mine died in the water was because I had the camera for a few months, and I had opened it many times, and the rubber gasket probably was dirty or had some irregularities along the edge. Like, see here, some pieces of dirt got on here or something, and something like that could allow water to get in. But just to be safe, I do recommend using the clear plastic housing that comes with it if you want to protect your camera. And especially if you want to go deeper. I was just in a very shallow pool of like 5 feet of water. And you can go, I believe, quite a bit deeper with the plastic housing on it. But I have not tried that. All right, so let's look at this other one. These are both the same model, just different cameras. One of the weaknesses of this camera is the doors, especially this little charging port door. It can break. This one is actually broken, so it can't be latched in place. It'll just sort of flop around. And I've seen this on a couple of them. In fact, I think this camera was sent to me by an eBay seller with the door broken. So that's definitely a weakness. It'll still work. The camera still works, but with this door flopping around, you might hear that in your audio. Now, the audio quality is not great. I guess it depends. I've had decent audio sometimes and not so great audio other times. So it just depends probably what your settings are. There's a wind reduction setting, and maybe that makes all the difference. I haven't done enough experimenting, but you would want to experiment. I don't think there's any way to connect a microphone to this, so you have to use the built-in microphone. All right, so we're trying to turn this thing on here. All right, wait. Did I just turn it off by mistake? All right, so we turn it on, and this is the screen that you get when you turn it on. And what it's telling me is that using this video resolution, 2.7K and 30 frames per second, I can get 5 hours and 18 minutes and 25 seconds worth of recording. But that's actually not true because the battery's going to die long before then. So that's not really the way it's going to happen. Now, I don't know why you would want to use 2.7K and 30 frames per second. Normally you would probably want the best resolution you can get. So we'll go over here to video resolution. And normally you would probably want 4K, 60 frames per second. And so now it's 4K, 60 frames per second. And we are only going to get 1 hour and 53 minutes and 44 seconds of recording at that setting. Now there's quite a few other settings, video resolution settings that you can choose from. It has slow motion. See, this is 120 frames per second, slow motion. But it also has 240 frames per second slow motion. And that's really hard to get to in the menu here because it moves so fast, right? So there's one that you can barely see. And that's the 240 frames per second one. It's like they're trying to discourage you from using it, but it's there. And, okay, there's one, so 240 frames per second, 720. But I think it'll do, I think it might do 1080, 240 frames per second. So those are your 1080, 60, 1080, 120. And I think there's a 240 in there that we are just not able to get to very easily. Anyways, so you have quite a few video settings to choose from. Normally, for the best quality, you probably want 4K, 60 frames per second would be my recommendation. But, you can choose whatever you want. This camera does have electronic image stabilization. That's right there, EIS. It's sort of grayed out, which means it's not accessible in the frame rate that we're using. And now we're into the sort of second setting or second menu. There's two menus. So let's go back to the home screen. You press the icon, the settings icon, and you get to the first menu. And this has all these different things. Video resolution, voice record, EV, I think that's an exposure variation thing. EIS is image stabilization, and that's not accessible for for the settings that we have. Loop recording, time-lapse. I'm not going to go over everything here. Slow motion movie, wind noise reduction. There's quite a lot of different settings. But it's kind of tricky to get to some of those settings. Anyway, so this is the first menu. Now, if you press that icon, the settings icon again, you'll go to the second menu. Now here is some important settings. One of them is date and time. And you'll set your date of the month, and then the month of the year, and then the year. And then you're going to set your time. Now, if we go back here, actually, you can actually change this. Or maybe it's just certain cameras are set different ways. Some will have the month first, and then it'll have the day, and then they'll have the year, or they'll have the day and the month and the year. Different ways to set it. I don't worry about it too much. What I have noticed is that this time display, or this time setting, it doesn't stay. It changes sort of randomly sometimes, and I don't know why. So every time I use this camera, I have to set the time and make sure it's right, so that my date stamp that appears on my video will be correct. Now you can turn the date stamp off. That's one of the settings, is the date stamp, I believe. Maybe that's a previous screen. Anyway, I like to use the date stamp so that it appears. There it is, date stamp, and it's on. That little check mark means that date and time will appear. You could just do date if you want, or you could turn the date stamp off. All right, so let's go back to the main screen here. When you're filming, you'll get an elapse counter at the top, and you'll get a red dot that flashes, so long as this screen is on. And you can set the screen to turn off, I think, after a minute or 3 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever. This blue light also will tell you that the camera is recording, but I find this blue light is hard to see outdoors in bright sunlight. The GoPro has a little red light that does the same thing, and I find that red light is a little easier to see. So if you're trying to record audio, you want to make sure that the microphone is appearing up here in the top right. And there's a way to either turn that on or off here in the camera. So we're going to stop now. Stop recording by pressing that again. That top button. So one thing about the lens that I should mention, it's a wide angle lens. It's 170 degrees. It's almost a fisheye lens. And so you need to be pretty close to anything if it's important that people be able to see it clearly. Like if you're trying to get a person's face, you want to be close to that person's face, or whatever it is, because otherwise they're going to seem kind of far away. You'll want to experiment with that, but it's a pretty wide angle lens, and there's no variation. You can't zoom in and out with this camera. So that's one thing to know. This camera will also take still photos. It will also take time-lapse. You can do time-lapse as a video or as a series of photos, and those photos will have a lot of detail. The problem with it is you need to have sort of sophisticated software to stitch those photos together to make a time-lapse video. Now one of the big differences between this and the GoPro is the image stabilization. With the GoPro, things are really smooth. Even if you're on a bumpy road, things are going to look remarkably smooth. With the Victure AC940, that is not the case. In fact, you may wonder if you even remembered to turn on the image stabilization, because it's going to look a little bit or a lot bumpy, even with the image stabilization turned on. And that's one thing I've noticed. Now, I'm not including any video samples. There are a lot of videos out there on YouTube that you can look at if you're interested in this camera. But one thing I want to mention, it comes with a big pile of accessories. And those are just your cheap accessories that come with any action camera these days. You need to be careful with them because a lot of them are kind of fragile and flimsy, and they'll break easily if you're not careful. One of the accessories I want to mention was a remote control, because it seems kind of weird to me. The way it works is you press the red button on the remote control, and it starts the camera recording, assuming that the camera's already on. And then you press the button again, and it turns the camera off. And that's it. If you want to turn the camera on and off again, well, you can't do it with remote control. You have to do it from the camera. If you want to do it again with the remote control, you actually have to turn the camera off and then turn the camera back on and then start again. I have had the camera freeze up on me a few times. And in that case, you're going to take the battery out and put it back in, and usually it'll start up again. I dropped one of these cameras off of a bicycle, and it actually continued to work, sort of. It would record for a few seconds, and then it would stop. And so really it wasn't very useful after it was dropped. So do not drop your camera if you can help it, even though it is supposedly an action camera. I had another camera that just sort of died on me after using it on my bicycle every day almost for several months. So I'm guessing that, just the shock of riding around, even though I'm riding on the roads, I'm not riding on the trails, but still there's bumps, potholes, curbs, and the camera just finally stopped working, and that was the end of it. So I would say they're good little cameras for $50 or $60. They're not going to last forever. If you only use it occasionally, maybe on the weekends, you might get a few years out of it. Just depends kind of how you use it and how your luck holds out. They're definitely not as good as the GoPro. They're not quite as sharp. The image stabilization is not as good. They're not as reliable. But, if you're going to put a camera next to a bomb going off or some place where it might actually get hurt, damaged, you might only want to spend $50 or $60 for this kind of a camera that might get damaged. So those are some of the things that I've noticed that seem worth mentioning about this camera. And I guess that's about it.